Hey everybody, welcome to today's Tip Tuesday, where I am going to show you why I made an interactive display that is actually an arm wrestling jig. And the reason that I made this was so that I could clearly communicate to people using their own body how dampening works on a coilover. So with this display, I have included so many different things. I'm actually going to talk about the key points that we need to focus on. So we are going to using this jig as much as I can, and then at the end I'm going to actually change the dampening and show you the resistance change with the rebound and the compression, how this works and how you'll be able to play with this at some kind of event at some point, because you know, we could sell these, we could make more of these. It's all for educational purposes. So let's get right into it. I have a sheet this time to stay on track and cover all of the bases. Starting out with the basics. What is a coilover? A coilover is essentially a coil over a shock. That's what the term actually means. And it is a shock assembly that is ride height adjustable. That is what this is. So you can see that here with these collars. I can adjust the ride height based on where the spring is. I can lock it in place, use my handy wrench and tighten it down. The next thing that we need to cover, what is dampening? Damper is designed to absorb and damper the compression and the rebound of a spring and the suspension. Essentially, they control the unwanted and excess movement of the spring. Key terms that we need to discuss during this video that we're not going to go deep into, but you guys can further investigate what I'm about to say. So key terms that you need to know when we're talking about dampening: bump and rebound. Bump and rebound. This coilover has an adjustment for bump, compression, and for rebound, which is the extension of the spring. Motion ratio. This jig actually has motion ratio. These holes here, I'm able to move the coilover mounting position up or down. On this, we have the fulcrum at the bottom, we have the force applied by my arm, and then we have the load given by the shock. So as I push this down, this is essentially a lever, and this is a jig that can simulate motion ratio quite effectively, because if I move this up, it'll get harder. Unsprung mass. This is really important when working with motion ratio in conjunction. Unsprung mass is essentially the amount of mass that isn't controlled by the coilover, and it is really important to consider how much weight there is, especially when you have a less than ideal motion ratio. I'm not going to get into that. One-way, two-way, three-way, and four-way. The difference between a two-way and a four-way is essentially you have a high and a low speed adjustment on the damper that you wouldn't normally have on a two-way. A two-way is just going to be high speed adjustment. All of the anti-geometries, such as anti-squat, anti-dive, anti-lift, dampening comes into play pretty heavily with these, because you can control the rate of anti-dive, anti-lift, and anti-squat by using your dampeners. And we can adjust for how aggressive our anti-squat is applied by adjusting our rebound, for example. Understanding the importance of ride height and how it relates to your suspension articulation. If you have a super high car or a super low car, you're probably going to be getting some form of bump steer, or your camber gain isn't going to be ideal, so keep all of that in mind. Your spring rates and the choices of spring rates relative to dampening is also very important. The damper's ability to control the spring is important, so keep in mind when you're changing your spring rates. Preload adjustment, so the amount that you're compressing the spring when the damper is at its maximum extension, that's called preload. So what preload is and why we use it is also important to look into. Your alignment settings are going to play a role heavily. There is going to be, like I said with ride height, it's basically the same. So consider your alignment whenever you're setting up your dampening and how it may play a factor in the articulation of your suspension. The use of helper springs and why helper springs are typically used. I can't go into that because of the length of this video, so again, look up why you may use helper springs. The impact of Aero Dynamics and how the rate of speed is going to affect how the dampening is going to begin to behave. Lots can go into this. A lot of cars don't usually have a lot of aero, but if you have any aero at all, as it increases, the weight of the chassis is essentially being increased, and that is going to affect how your springs and your dampers behave and control the car. Maintaining and doing regular checks, making sure the nitrogen is full and these lines aren't leaking anything, is going to be important when you want to have reliable, consistent dampening. Testing and tuning. With anything, you're going to have to put the time in order to get the result. There's nothing in life that works with just getting it right the first time. In order to obtain the best results from what I'm about to say, you're going to need to put in some time into testing. Feedback collection, how are you going to confirm or deny that you and your changes were able to make a difference in your driving and your performance? Bump stops. Bump stops is a big one when it comes to drifting. You do not want to be on the bump stops. On this quick example, we have a bump stop here, and then I have another example where we have a zip tie on the shaft. This is going to be a method of determining how far did we compress our suspension and were we able to stay off the bumps, because as soon as you compress this bump stop fully, you are no longer using what the damper is there for, and you are essentially losing traction, and that's about as long as I'm going to talk about that. So this is a really cool tip if you guys don't already do this. A zip tie is essentially going to save your position on how far your suspension compressed. Basics, where should you start when you buy new coilovers? To put it really simply, you should start at a softer setting. So probably if you have 32-way adjustable coilovers, start around the 8 mark. They're probably not going to work that great at their full soft because you're basically allowing no control over the spring, but start around 8. The reason I say that is because driving a car stiff is a lot more dangerous than driving a car that's soft. When it's soft, all you're gonna feel like is you're in a boat and the car's a little rolly. When it's stiff, you can actually break traction instantly. You can understeer or oversteer very easily. Bumps can send the car off the track, so start soft first, work your way up from there, and there is a bell curve when it comes to dampening. There is a too hard and there is a too soft. You want to be somewhere in the middle to maintain that tire's contact with the pavement and get as much grip as possible. That's the objective for drifting and for road racing. What adjustments do what? We have a rebound and we have a compression or bump adjustment on these specific coilovers. The rebound is controlling the rate of expansion. The compression or bump is controlling the rate of bump or compression. So when I hit a bump, how fast is my wheel going to be able to react or jump up into the chassis? In tuning for these, we have to consider that on most coilovers, let's talk about single way, you are only really adjusting for the rebound. If you have a one-way adjustable coilover and you are adding 8 clicks to it, all of those clicks are mostly for rebound. It almost does no compression. Some coilovers may be different than others. It might be an 80% rebound, 20% compression, but some of them are just rebound. When we have a two-way now, we have compression and we have rebound adjustment, but the two adjustments are not linear. If I do 4 clicks on compression, it may only be equivalent to the same as like 1 click on rebound. And we're talking about like rate of change. How much am I actually changing? And I actually learned a lot of that when using this arm wrestling jig, because I would do 4 clicks on the compression and I would arm wrestle the jig. And then I would do 4 or 1 click or 4 clicks, whatever, on the rebound, and I would do the jig. And I would see a much larger difference between the rebound versus the compression. And there's a couple reasons for this. You really don't want a crazy stiff compression when it comes to cars unless you're dealing with really heavy loads, like a lot of aero or grip cars that have huge tires and they need that bump control on relatively good tracks. Like if you took a high aero car and took it to a bumpy track, you would have a really bad time dealing with that, because as the car picks up speed, it's increasing its weight, sometimes 2,000–3,000 pounds. The damper has to control all of that. So going anything slower is going to be quite uncontrollable. It actually requires that downforce. So basically what I'm saying is this coilover, or most two-ways, maxing out the compression is still going to be relatively soft compared to maxing out the rebound. And that, again, is easily displayed on this jig here. If I go full compression, softest rebound, I mean, I might as well just do it. So we'll go full compression. This is full compression, softest rebound. See if we can hold the table somewhere. So that is super easy on the retract and decently hard on the compression. Give her a couple cycles there. Okay, so we go full soft on the compression and we go full stiff on the rebound. I already know, because I've tried this, it's going to be quite a dramatic difference on the rebound side of things. I'm not doing all the in-between settings just because I'm showing you this for demonstration purposes. So not too bad on the compression, but then on the rebound, it's like crazy slow. Like I need to try like probably 70–80% effort. Maybe I'll go 100% and see. Yeah, like I can't speed that up at all. You're not gonna have a linear adjustment when it comes to compression versus rebound, unless you did what I just did, or unless you have potentiometers or ways to measure. You probably didn't know that. Like I knew the one ways were majority rebound, so I guess I could have easily said to myself, but whenever I'm adjusting mine on my car, I'm usually basing it off of external footage and then just behavior along the course, plus my zip tie method here. We will check if we're on the bumps, and we're just doing things like that. And if I was on the bumps, I would then adjust my compression dampening, or I would adjust my motion ratio to be a bit stiffer, something along those lines, because this is going to kind of tell me the story of my compression, the zip tie. And I do not want to be sitting on the bump stops, because immediately you're going to start losing traction. I was hitting these pretty aggressively in Mondello, so I had to make some adjustments. I actually didn't have enough time to make the adjustment to where this wasn't being bottomed out, and it was only on the driver's side. So going into Drift Masters round 2, I'm already having made the changes so that we can then monitor this again. I think I talked about it basically, but my last tip would be, how do you determine if you need to make any adjustments? Because I'm telling you all this information and then you don't know what to do with it. Basically, the best things that you can do would be take a look at the track conditions, see if the car is understeer prone or oversteer prone. If you don't know the differences, just look that up. Slow motion footage is great for watching your run replays. So any media guys there at all, watch your runs versus others, just see how the behavior is on the track, and then watch your in-car footage, your throttle response and your steering response. And this is all gonna play into how the damper is working on your car. With all of this said, you have to factor in the driver. Everything that I talk about usually has the driver external, assuming that the driver is a competent driver. If they get into the car after watching these videos and taking in the tips, you're gonna do really, really well. But obviously, if you're not a good driver, or you're not an experienced driver, or you don't have enough seat time, it's really difficult to apply everything that I'm saying. You kind of have to take it in strides, and you need to put in the time and do the testing and trial it yourself. I guess for the end of this video, we can kind of... It's also getting really hot in here, Jack. For the end of this video, I guess we could play with some settings, maybe max out both damper and compression. Also, by the way, on this coilover, your compression adjustment is done by the external canister, and your rebound is done by the adjustment knob. This is in fact a Corvette front coilover, and I basically designed it with this aluminum base plate. We might as well talk about it. We're here. We have multiple adjustment holes. I do plan on getting a longer damper from BC so that I can get even more range out of this thing. My goal was to have my arm at like, I don't know, 20 degrees off the table and have good range all the way to like 20 degrees off the table. But yeah, I mean, let's max it out and see how ridiculous I look doing it. Put the zip tie down. This is also in the softest motion ratio location. It would get stiffer if I moved this up. You can do left hand or right hand, which was by design. All right, so let's see what this thing can do going both ways. Okay, so that's max compression and max rebound. That's it. I mean, we're gonna have this at some kind of a event. Again, this is just a tip video, so we're not covering everything in maximum detail, but I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys get to try this out at an event one of these days coming soon. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys on the next one.